Doesn't, because, as you said, it goes on for 2 more years. So what happens is, so you said Lee doesn't really take a hit, but does he feel a little bit guilty about his performance in Gettysburg, James?
He does, and so much so that he actually writes Jefferson Davis and offers to resign. Davis, of course, had nothing. We wouldn't have any of that. He said, no, you're not resigning. Your resignation is not accepted. I mean, who's going to replace Robert E. Lee?
Yeah, like we say, it's qualities that seem to serve him well in the past, of aggressiveness, of giving his officers enough flexibility to handle situations that require that kind of flexibility that suited him well in the past, especially early in the war, seemed to hurt him. So, James, I mean, people hear the Battle of Gettysburg. What do you think, when you've taught students, what do they associate with Gettysburg if they don't know much else?
They probably think about Robert E. Lee. They think about Pickett's charge. They probably think about maybe even they think it's the turning point of the war. They think it's a big battle, well, all of which are correct except for the turning point part. But but they don't know much more than that.
Well, I think, too, it's worth taking a second to mention the Gettysburg Address, because many people hear that but don't connect it with the battle. But this is directly what Lincoln is speaking of. So, yeah, could you mention some things about the conditions in which he composes the speech and surveys the battlefield?
Yes. So Lincoln decides that they're going to they had to, obviously they lost so many men there. They didn't have the ability to embalm all these people and to send them back to their homes. So most of the people that are killed have to be buried right there on the battlefield, Union and Confederate. Lincoln decides to dedicate part of the battlefield as a national cemetery, which happens on a lot of battlefields. There's one at Shiloh. There's one at most, or at least many of the battlefields. So they have a dedication ceremony that November, and there's all these dignitaries there, and Lincoln's not even the main speaker. Lincoln is just asked to give a few thoughts, a few reflections. The main speaker is a man named Edward Everett, who was a former, he was an academic, he was a politician, he had held a cabinet position at one point. Edward Everett goes on and speaks for 2 hours. And that's not uncommon for that day, right? Today we think, oh my gosh, I couldn't listen to somebody talk for 2 hours, but because we have such short attention spans. But Lincoln gets up there, he pulls out a piece of paper and he says, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that our nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And he sat down, and it was so fast that a cameraman was trying to take a picture of him, and he just barely got a blur of Lincoln walking back to sit down because, the cameras took a long time to get set up and took a while to take the photos. And of course, this becomes, at the time, it wasn't really acknowledged as a great speech, but over time it gained a lot of credibility and a lot of fame. And now we memorize it, and it's considered to be one of our greatest speeches. So, and it is, it's a magnificent speech. Edward Everett went up to Lincoln later and he said, "You said more in 2 minutes than I said in 2 hours."
Brevity is the soul of wit, as William Shakespeare said, and he's right.
Absolutely, yes.
All right. Well, a lot of interesting things that we've gone over in this episode. This changes the narrative of what's been happening. I don't know how did Winston Churchill say in 1941 or after Dunkirk that this is not the end, this is not the beginning of the end, but this is the... I can't even figure out in my mind. It just jumps around from end and beginning and end, but it is the end of the beginning. Do I have that right?
Something like that.
Okay. I really didn't stick the landing there. Okay. But you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. So we see that obviously the Confederate Army is not invincible. We saw that on the Western Front. We saw that on the Eastern Front. Tactics that served Lee very well did not work. His orders are too vague and discretionary. He's not always, even though he had the freedom of movement to choose the time and place of battle, he doesn't use it correctly. So chinks in the armor are starting to appear. But still have a lot of ground to cover. So, James, where will the next episode take us?
We're going to go back out west. We're going to see that Grant, because of his great success at Vicksburg, is going to get a promotion, and he's going to be recalled and brought east. He's going to stop off in Tennessee, and we're going to have a couple of really key battles called Chattanooga and Chickamauga, one in southeastern Tennessee and one in northern Georgia. And then we'll see what happens with those. And then we're going to see eventually what happens when Grant comes all the way to the east and takes command of the Army of the Potomac.
All right. We'll see you there. All right. Well, that was the episode for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. First of all, I'd like to thank the Knowlton's Rangers, and especially our spy masters, Baron Freza, Carl from Norway, Chris from Maine, and Melissa Sarnowski. And I'll explain what that means in a second. If you want to support the show and help me keep producing this content, there are 4 easy ways for you to do it. 1, subscribe to the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to do that, you can go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and there you'll find instructions. 2, join our Facebook group, which you can find if you just search for History Unplugged. And please like and share posts that I put up about new episodes. 3, submit a question to me so that I can answer it on air. You can email me at info@historyonthenet.com or leave a voicemail. And again, go to historyunpluggedpodcast.com and you'll find instructions. Lastly, and I think this one is the best, is to become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. The Knowlton's Rangers were an elite reconnaissance and espionage detachment of the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War, but it's also the name of the History Unplugged membership program. Learn how to join by going to patreon.com/unplugged. So here's what you get if you become one of the Knowlton's Rangers. If you join at the level of Scout, you can get early access to new podcast episodes, along with enjoying absolutely every single episode of the History Unplugged podcast ad-free. All 270 and counting episodes. If you join at the level of Intelligence Officer, you can also get access to premium episodes, like a multi-part series on the life of Audie Murphy, the most decorated combat soldier in World War II, or the 10-part series Ottoman Lives, a series that looks at the cast of characters that made up the Ottoman Empire, such as the Sultan, the Eunuch, the harem servant girl, and the soldier. And finally, if you join at the level of Spy Master, you get all the same stuff as the Scouts and Intelligence Officers, but you also get a shout-out to you and or your business at the end of each episode, a 3-pack of hardcover history books, plus you'll be put at the very front of the line for me to answer your question about history, and I can guarantee I will dedicate an episode that's about an hour long or so to your question. Sign up at patreon.com/unplugged. Again, that's patreon.com/unplugged. Anyway, those are the ways you can help out the show. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.